Okay, welcome everyone. Hopefully you can see and hear me okay. My name is Chris Howard. I'm the Director of the Professional Law Institute here at the Dixon Poon School of Law at King's College London. It's an absolute pleasure to welcome you to today's event. I'm aware that we've got a real mixture of people in our audience today. We have students, we have current students, we have those considering a career and education in law, and we have another number of other stakeholders as well. So it's great to welcome such a broad range of people to this talk. I'm going to say a few words of introduction now before I then hand over to our two principal speakers today, Nigel Spencer and Roger Parker. So just to give my brief perspective before we begin, this talk I think comes at a critical time. Obviously, we're in the throes of a worldwide crisis at the moment in COVID-19, and that's no doubt playing on many of your minds. But I think outside of that emergency issue, there are also a whole range of other global issues that are affecting the legal market and the legal industry in terms of globalization, in terms of the impact of technology, and the changing socio-political landscape that we find ourselves in. So I think it's a really important time for students to be thinking about the skills they need to forge a successful career. At King's, on our LLB programs and LLM programs, we work hard to provide our students with opportunities for a greater range of skills than they will simply find on the academic program. So to build on the critical thinking skills from their academic studies, we also layer on skills around negotiation, strategic decision making, and we offer our students the opportunity to have real life practice experience in our legal clinic. So with the help of the employability team and all those working within the school, we try and make sure that we stay ahead of the curve. But today's talk is going to take us further and give us an indication of what the trends and the issues and skills and competencies are going to be for lawyers in the next part of this century. Just a couple of housekeeping points before we carry on. We've got a Q&A for today, so if you look on your toolbar, you'll find a Q&A function. You're very welcome to put questions throughout this event, and we'll also have some questions at the end of the event. We will try and answer as many of your questions as possible. Obviously, if there are any questions we can't answer, apologies in advance, but we will try and deal with as many as we can. We will also be using Slido, so if you go to your browser and put in slide.do, as is indicated on the slide in front of you now, and put in code 9193. When the time comes, you'll see there's a question there, and we'd love to have your input on that question. Okay, now I'm going to introduce our two speakers. I'm very pleased to welcome back, in fact, Nigel Spencer and Roger, who've both helped the school in previous incarnations of these talks. So Nigel, first of all, is a senior client director and executive coach with the Saïd Business School in Oxford. And prior to his post there, he's worked in major law firms for many, many years. He was global director of learning and development at both Reed Smith and Simmons, two top 100 law firms. And he also led on the creation of one of the first innovation hubs while at Reed Smith. He's also a visiting professor at the School of Law, Queen Mary University, focusing on industry. And I'm very pleased to say he's a King's graduate, having achieved his BA and PhD at King's College London. So Nigel, I think, brings unparalleled experience on learning and development. And if you go to his LinkedIn site, you can look at some of the many awards he's achieved for his learning and development work. Roger Parker is a senior counsel with Reed Smith and an independent consultant. But that's after more than 25 years of practice experience at Reed Smith, where he was part of the senior management team and management partner for Asia Pacific, Europe, the Middle East and Asia, and held a number of other management roles. One other point to make as we continue, this talk will be recorded, and so you will be able to access it again after today, but we're very grateful to you for being with us for the live presentation today, and obviously you can take the opportunity to interact with our speakers. Well, now without further ado, I'm going to go to our speakers to begin the substantive talk. So I'll start by introducing Nigel Spencer. Nigel is going to talk through the structure of today's talk, and then he's going to hand over to Roger to talk more about the issues for today. So at that point, I'll hand over to Nigel.
Marvellous. Thank you very much indeed, Chris, and it's a pleasure to be here with everyone. So we've given the talk this title you see on the screen there, Essential Skills for Future Lawyers, and what you really need for 21st century practice. So we want to make this a very practical talk and give you some tips and ideas. And we want to structure it also in 4 main sections. So I just wanted to highlight those first. Roger and I thought, first of all, it might be interesting to look at the client's point of view, first of all. So for the first section, Roger's going to talk a lot about, what skills from the client side, what are they expecting lawyers who work with them to bring? So look at the client's point of view. We then want to think about skills as you develop your career. So we're talking obviously about the beginnings of a career, but also how should that shift as you go through your career as well. Thirdly, we'll give a little bit, as Chris hinted at there, a little bit of broader context to think about the changing environment, the changing market. How are career paths changing because legal service and legal service providers are changing themselves? So what's that context for career paths? And then lastly, probably just to come back to, where does one start and how does one start as well? So how does one start to build one's career? So they're the 4 main sections we're going to cover today. And Roger, perhaps I could hand over to yourself now, as I say, just to take us through that first part around how do clients see it? What are they really needing from their lawyers?
Thank you very much, Nigel. Delighted to be here. Thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in for this talk. So this section, what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about what the clients say. This is primarily law-based, but is also professional services generally. And the first thing I'd say is that we've procured a substantial amount of feedback from clients directly, but in doing that, it's not been form-filling feedback, it has been discussion-based, so it all has a context. This is very important in the context of listening to what they really are saying to us. And just to start off with a couple of quotes here from clients. When one is seeing clients saying they face an existential threat to the industry, they will be looking for a different set of qualities from their providers than before. And from last time, the last in the series of these talks, those who embrace change will be the winners. Change means opportunity. Next slide, please. So the first question I think it's worth addressing is actually move on, please, to the next slide as well. Thank you very much. Is what is listening when we talk to the clients? 73% of law firms, according to Acritas, I understand it, say they have formal client feedback programs in place, but only 16% of clients said that they were invited to participate in feedback programs. Doesn't matter exactly what the statistics are, but there is a delta there to observe. So to me, this goes to the question of communication and what does listening really mean? Because one of the key messages I'd like to get across is listening to the clients, listening to the market, indeed listening to the law firms and those in the industry about what will be required for the future. Next slide, please. I would just say that one bit of feedback that has been received across the board is that notwithstanding the importance of relationships during the COVID time, clients perhaps are saying the phone has not been picked up enough by the lawyers. So lots of communication, lots of messages across the internet and down the wire, but quite a lot of it not bespoke, not driven by direct discussion with clients. So 2 slides now coming up. This first one I'll just dwell on, but the first one is, what do clients tell us they want? Sorry, could you go back a slide, please, to what do clients tell us they want? And I've summarised here key messages, and this comes from many hours of discussions, but expertise, specialty, precision, understanding our business and industry knowledge. One thing I would say about this is the linkage between those words. So thinking about future, how do you bring expertise to bear? How do you develop expertise? Can you really be precise if you don't really have knowledge of your subject? Something for you to think about. Can you really understand a client's business without having deep knowledge? At what point in my career do I start to think about specialty? You'll see from later, we're not advocating a jump from A to Z straight away. Absolutely not, but it's just a factor to think about. Reacting to feedback, responsiveness and keeping in touch. As I just mentioned around the phone calls, absolutely pivotal from a client's perspective. This is coming from clients at very senior parts of their organisations. What does responsive really mean? Because what it means to you, to me, to Nigel, to Chris, may well be different from what it means to the client who's paying the bill. And then the question of the use of the organisation, the use of colleagues. How does one really collaborate with the assets and people one has available to oneself to make sure expertise is being deployed effectively for the client? All of this goes to the question of the ability to be relevant, and that must be a target for our future skills base. Next slide, please. So what does value look like to clients? Last time, one of the speakers said, this is all about the move from cost to value. So as we see the changing shape of the legal services industry, clients increasingly thinking about value rather than necessarily just the dispensation of the legal product. Great lawyering is absolutely pivotal, but where do I get my extra value? And so here are some things the clients have said around value. Well, partnering, making my life easier, increasing collaboration and relationships across boundaries and the value that provides. In the last 10 years, there's been an existential change in some of this because, for example, take a topic like CSR, like pro bono. Law firms, in many cases, have significant resource available to them themselves to commit to pro bono. Many clients don't have that resource in their legal department. This is a classic area where increasingly law firms and clients have collaborated and partnered and made a real difference. Knowledge sharing, investment in the client. Nigel may say something later on about a product he developed, which involved students who are qualifying in the process of going into traineeship, but spending time at clients as they join the law firms to learn about solutions, commercial issues, commercial solutions, business experience, and working and solving clients' problems. So this really is investment in client, knowledge sharing, but also developing skills at the very same time. Creating opportunities for clients and using the resources of the firm. And diversity and inclusion. So working with clients on those topics and on those very important subjects. And in different parts of the world, diversity and inclusion will be interpreted in different ways. But undoubtedly, the importance of this topic to clients is, again, much, much more significant than perhaps it was. And in many cases, clients will be measuring this absolutely as a key part of their relationship and the future of their relationship with a law firm. Next slide, please. So in the next 3 slides, coming towards the end of the first section, what we've tried to do, Nigel and myself here, is to capture and translate what the clients have actually said into skills, qualities, habits, etc. So I just wanted to focus on this slide for a minute, delivering on what the client seeks. And I'm just going to pick up some topics. So, for example, I mentioned expertise in one of the previous slides. So the words that come to mind from the discussions with the clients, expertise, industry knowledge, applying knowledge, understanding client business. I'm just going to pull one of those out and say the application of knowledge is absolutely pivotal. So let's assume we can build up our expertise over time. Huge expertise already developed when one's been on a law course and established a law degree. Similarly, when one goes into traineeship, similarly when one qualifies as associate and builds up as junior, mid and senior in traditional law firm structures, and we'll be talking about how there's a lot more scope now other than those. But it's the application that becomes important. Another box just further down there, the question of communication. Look at communication in the widest possible sense. It's absolutely pivotal from the client's perspective. Communication to me includes responsiveness, it includes subjects like service orientated, and if one goes across to the other side of the slide, developing one's project management skills, one's planning skills are absolutely pivotal. So time and time again, bringing that project in on time with the client's timetable at the heart is a very important topic. Now, some other...
Can I just jump for a second, Roger? I've got a couple of questions which I think really feed into this slide, and I want to just ask them if I may. So first question about technology. You've got tech capabilities as a kind of key indicator at the top left of your slide. The question we've received is there seems to be a sentiment amongst aspiring lawyers that we need to be tech savvy, but what does that actually mean? Will we have to learn to code? Would that even be valuable for students wanting to practice law and not go into the legal tech side? Now, there's maybe something you're going to look at later, but any early comments on what being tech capable really means?
I mean, it's interesting. Roger,
Nigel.
sorry.
Nigel, you go.
Sorry, yeah. I mean, it's interesting. So I was listening to, I tuned into the Legal Geek conference, online conference yesterday, Chris, and was listening to some of the sessions there. And you may know, I actually wrote, after working on the Innovation Hub in Reed Smith, I actually wrote a chapter with Alex Smith, who Alex was the hub manager, and we actually called it "Do Lawyers Need to Code?" And I think for me, the sense is awareness and helping almost, again, Roger's point of listening to clients. So if we're listening to the client, interpreting their needs, but then we may, and I'll come on to this a little bit later, Chris, that thought of, in our firm, have we created a little new unit or department which has that capability with some very tech savvy folk who might be coders? But for me, I think the skill and the value add there is for the lawyer who might be an IP specialist or a corporate lawyer or finance lawyer to actually know, oh, okay, I know there are some tools here which could help the client in what they're asking me. So I think it's almost the translation between the tech and the client's problem with a legal lens, if that makes sense. But I don't think, for me, it's not necessarily learning to code, I would say. Roger.
Well, I agree with the thrust of that answer. I mean, my sense is an ability to be tech savvy and tech aware for the purposes of delivering service to the client, and being able to deliver that from flexible platforms and flexible responses from different locations. So I think that's increasingly of value and importance, and we know that because of what's happened in the last few months. I agree that the question of sort of coding and I'll say more sophisticated, being a layman, more sophisticated concepts, I see those as different and taking it to another level. But interestingly, there is absolutely a role for some of these skills in the law firm of today and the future, and indeed those organisations that are not law firms but are part of the legal landscape now and developing very rapidly indeed. So I think understanding what the technology means and then deciding what one's approach to it is absolutely pivotal. But the answer is, I don't think everyone has to be a coder in my view, but again, that might change.
Thanks very much. Can I ask one more question at this point? Then we've got a couple more that perhaps we'll come to a bit later. I think this is obviously a crucial question right now, and it again relates to one of the points that you made earlier. In fact, I was going to pick up on this. You talked about diversity and inclusion, and I've certainly heard the comment that more and more clients want their lawyers to look like them and to have the same sort of cultural awareness that they've got to create that sort of real client relationship. But taking it on to another connected point. So the question we've received is, how would the Black Lives Matter movement impact employability rates of BME people in law firms? I mean, how do you think law firms are responding to the challenge of Black Lives Matter? Big question, perhaps maybe too big to be answered in its entirety in this session, but I think it does relate to that piece around clients and lawyers being representative.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, my first reaction to that is, I mean, the role of the law firm and the when I say law firm, generally, I'll be meaning throughout this hour organisations who are in the law firm space. They don't have to technically be law firms and LLPs or ABSs or whatever they are, but their role in society and their communication with society and their ability to influence and deliver feels to me to be increasingly important. And so law firms and professional services organisations as agents of change, I believe, can make a huge difference, particularly in the context of working with the clients. And absolutely, the clients are saying they see the law firm as the extension of their culture, their core values, their principles and their purpose. and that will only accelerate as a result of recent events, in my view, and quite rightly so. So I think there's positivity in answer to your question. I think it has to be acknowledged across professional services, and I've certainly seen items in the newspapers this week relating to accountancy, in fact, where accountancy firms are very conscious of this and looking at this topic. So I think there is a desire to change and a desire to improve, but clients certainly are, on the face of it, doing their bit and saying we expect our law firms to deliver, and if they don't, what's the consequence of that? It's going to affect the instructions, undoubtedly. Nigel, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I mean, just on that last part, I agree completely, Roger. And on that last point, it's interesting. I know, some firms have been told directly by clients, if you want to be on our panel of firms, our group of firms who we sometimes give work to when we ask external lawyers for help, we will measure you on all these various metrics, including, as Roger has indicated, many of the things around how diverse and inclusive you are. And also, Chris, what's really interesting is that they've then come back a year or two later and sometimes said, and we're not just going to do it. It's not just, you present a diverse team, and that would be in a gender sense, in an ethnicity sense, etc., etc. You don't just present that team when you're doing a pitch to us, but actually we're going to come back a year later and actually see, well, who actually did the work on those projects. So they're really taking, as Roger says, Chris, the clients are taking this very seriously, quite rightly. And as you say, Roger, seeing almost the firm and their service provider as an extension of how they want their culture to be as well. So it's becoming a very front and centre issue, Chris, I would say.
I mean, I'll just conclude on this. Loads of questions coming in, but just on this last point, a comment that's just come in, re Black Lives Matter. Part of the firm's culture may be how they deal with this. Find out how they're going beyond tokenism and virtue signaling, and what conversations they're having with their staff and their clients. So I think it's a really good comment. By the way, to all of those who are contributing questions, as I say, it's great to hear these questions. Do have a look through what others are asking, and we'll try and come to as many as we can. I'm conscious of time, so I might just ask you, Roger, if you want to finish off your this part of the session.
Absolutely. 2 more slides, but next slide, please. And just a quote from a client on the creativity issue. Very recently, a client said, creativity needed in relation to your value and your differentiator. So when thinking about oneself and one's skills and habits we're coming on to now, the clients are saying, think about how you can differentiate yourself. What's your real purpose and core? Now, these are habits and skills, not in this slide. So in the light of time, I'll not dwell on it, but I'll just pick out 1 or 2. So can I look at that? So this one, collaborative work groups around client issues. I would identify this as increasingly important. And as was said last time, one of these talks was held a couple of weeks ago, and it's said directly by clients recently to us that you are an extension, as we just discussed, of the legal department. Teamwork is key. This is a quote. Teamwork is key. A seamless approach to the use of external counsel is crucial to be true business partners. And also the phraseology, the socializing of law. So these are the sorts of topics that are increasingly in clients' minds.
Roger, it really strikes me it struck me something you mentioned earlier, that point of collaboration. You mentioned earlier how many almost touch points there were with the firm now, between the firm and the client. You say whether it's the CSR, whether it's corporate responsibility team, or whether it's different practice groups, or whether it's the knowledge function. So it strikes me this point of collaboration is really coming to the centre from all the conversations, and the feedback you've had from clients. Absolutely, and it has to adapt in the context of the current environment and the fact that we're all more virtual than we were. You'll see as well on the left-hand side digital literacy, which we've touched on. But one phrase from last time: have a digital mindset, because of the likely model change, the likely business model changes. So having a digital mindset, I think, is very important. And perhaps the last one, just to draw attention to, when it comes to project mapping and planning, we know that more and more the new world of law is recruiting specialist DPM, specialist project management people who are fabulous users of technology and certain types of project management software. But again, this comes into communication, it comes into time management,
and another very important aspect of the future role. How much are we talking about here? One thing that strikes me that is not quotes law quotes. A huge amount of this is not just law, and a huge amount of this could be applied to surveying, to accountancy, and to many other professions. Next slide, please.
Yeah, can I just briefly come in on that? I mean, I think one of the things I'm sure some of our audience are thinking right now is this is a huge palette of skills and aptitudes that is the expectation, and obviously that can be quite daunting to many people. And just to kind of paraphrase a couple of the questions, one of the questions was about the extent to which you need to have these aptitudes when applying for university, even you know, how much your university is expecting that, and also another question about at what stage you need to start having that specialist knowledge of your client's industry. So I suppose the question is, I mean, from a university point of view, as I said earlier, we try and build up and give a kind of foundation level equipment to our students to start to get them to think in this way. But equally, our focus at university, in particular our LLB programs, is around getting that really strong black letter law, that substantial legal knowledge, which, as we all agree, is still the fundamental part of legal practice. But what do you see as the kind of stages by which you might develop these skills, and how many and how much and at what stage?
Chris, I think we can do what we'll do, if I may, in 2 slides time, as I hand over to Nigel. We've got a little slide that just tabulates the beginning, and then 3 other stages, and then the end being whatever the end is meant to be, like senior partner or director or something senior, more senior. So may I come back to that at that point, because I think it is absolutely the case, and we are looking here at the palette, and absolutely no one expects anyone. I mean, actually probably no one does have all these qualities, even in the perfect world. So we will come back to that question, absolutely. So just looking here, if you just gloss around this is a mindset to succeed, but take this as something that could apply right at the beginning of a career. But there's some really important topics here. We've touched on collaboration. We'll come back to the concepts of continual learning, ability to change and resilience. And I'm just going to focus on one other on that bottom left there, open-minded and positivity, which does link to the ability to change, but the need for positivity and half full in difficult changing times, as much as one can. And then just next door to that, what we were talking about, the current situation, I mean, core values and culture, breadth and diversity of thought, and the linkage and the importance we know is there between applicants to these businesses, what they believe and their purpose and their core values as individuals, and how that maps with the organisation in question, not only in terms of what they've achieved so far and delivered, what they say and the brand of the people who talk to them representing that organisations, but they're trying to change too. And so what's their recipe, what's their appetite for change, and what's the brand of the organisation they're joining? Next slide, please. And I think at that point, Nigel, switching over to you.
Yeah, and just before I go on to this, Roger, just a couple of thoughts, and Chris, to touch on one of those questions. In terms of, you're right, it can look daunting. I suppose I would just say, in terms of how one might develop these skills, as you mentioned, as Roger mentioned, I'm a massive fan of this learning by doing. And so I would say wherever you can get the opportunity to have little bits of experience, whether it's a week here, a week there. As Roger said, we put together a program for our graduates before they joined the firm, where they went out to a client for a month, you know, but it wasn't to work on a legal problem. It was actually to go into a part of the client, which was to apply their knowledge from a more commercial MBA type module. So what I was trying to do was give them the opportunity to actually learn by doing and actually go into a commercial environment. And lots of the things you saw on Roger's slide there, for all of you watching, there are lots of those skills that you would develop by actually having a go at something in practice, you know, by being on a placement or something such as that. I know they're very hard to come by. I know there's that challenge for everyone, but, you know, try and seek out those degrees, or as you say, Chris, the experience in the legal advice centres and those types of practical experiences. You will learn to relate to clients, and lots of things that Roger's just said, you know, will come to the fore. So we'll come back to that. Right. I just wanted to add this slide before we moved on to the next section. So Roger's spoken a lot about the client's point of view and how they look at their external lawyers and the skills they might need. And I put this title here as the title here, how you see it. And this was just an interesting survey, I thought. So this was a survey of about 3,700 global 18 to 26-year-olds that was done up at Oxford, actually, a future skills survey just a couple of years ago. And what's really interesting, so the red represents what you might call the soft skills, and the yellow bars are the more technical skills. And so I thought what's interesting about this is that actually the next generation, all of you coming through, are already thinking, I get it, I actually need to develop these broader skills, things like problem solving, the communication Roger's mentioned already, leadership skills. I won't go through them all, you can see the list there. But just to highlight and hopefully give some comfort on some other things that you'll have all no doubt read about, you know, the AI empowered world. Will that mean jobs are all lost, especially at junior levels? I think for me, all the things that Roger's been talking about that the clients want, and the things you can see here that all of you are probably already thinking, I realise I need to develop that. For me, they are the things that will actually differentiate us and actually mean that they are the human skills almost that give us that that still mean we actually add value to clients in those trusted relationships. You know, the communication, the collaboration, the critical thinking, those three types of areas, you know, which kind of cover a broad range of all these skills.
Can I just come in, Nigel, with a comment from one of our, by the way, a fantastic discussion going on in the Q&A. So thank you again all of you for the questions that are coming in. Just this comment's quite apposite right now. As a client and SRA supervisor, team fit is more important to me than black letter law. Those skills we can hope, but you can't change your personality.
Interesting. Yeah, no, thank you, Chris. Yeah, I mean, it is interesting, as you say. I mean, of course, there's, as Roger and you have said, Chris, you know, the need for the black letter law, you know, the expertise. But it's interesting ultimately what clients make choices about. That's I suppose some of the things that we're trying to get across today. That emphasis of the broader skill set. And just one thing really before we move on to the second section. You know, down the bottom here, you know, there's one skill mentioned at that table of knowing how to facilitate or have creativity in the workplace and build that. And Roger, that took me on to the thought of the next section we're going to move on to, because when I think of if you've got the skill of almost nurturing that creativity in your team, perhaps, you know, as you go up through your career, we always say, OK, manage yourself, manage your team, manage the firm. And obviously you've done that even at the very highest level. So I just wondered if we move on to now to the second section where we were going to think about skills, as you say, the delta between the beginning of careers and then further up careers. So I'll hand over to yourself.
Next slide, please. So this is our last slide related to this topic, but Chris, this may just help a little bit to focus down on the beginning and then sort of more senior parts of career. So we've taken sort of the idea of pre-qualification, understands values of business, buys in, good citizen. Again, it's a sort of conventional law firm thinking, but I mean, it can be applied to sort of graduate schemes at corporates and that sort of thing. Indeed, anywhere on the landscape of professional services and legal services entities. But just some of the things that seem important: personal responsibility and accountability for one's own work that one is given or one is doing. And indeed in relation to studying and that sort of thing. Personal integrity and professional ethics. Adherence to core values, and hopefully they link in those last two topics. Awareness of business vision and strategy. I mean, an appreciation, a little bit of time on what organisations are trying to achieve and how you can sort of fit into that. And the participation in business activities, including pro bono and including graduate recruitment exercises. And how important is the role of a sort of quasi-mentor of a newly qualified lawyer or accountant to those people coming in a year or two or three below, and not below, but more junior too. So take those. I think these. So think what it is that you can own as a more junior member of the profession. But just going to the other end, I mean, no better, no worse, but just different. You know, what should an owner of the business be doing? He or she should be thinking about setting tone, achieving certain business goals, motivation of others, certain performance matters, and commanding respects and more of what's there. And then in the middle, there's junior, mid, senior, and a gradual approach to it. And I think there's a mixture of what the organisation will say and then what you will own and what you decide. And never fear about learning through mistakes. I know there's an absolute fear of making a mistake in a profession, but I think in society as a whole, a little bit more of learning on the job and understanding and developing. And yes, we all make mistakes, but not all mistakes matter. And sometimes a change of heart, listening to others, a change of mind is a good thing. Nigel, over to you.
Yeah, and just actually on that slide, Roger, I was just going to say that made me think of the thought of when I've done an exercise in a development session, quite often saying, who was your best boss, or when did you learn the most? You often get the answer from people, however senior or junior they are, I've actually, do you know what? Now I think about it, it was when someone threw me in at the deep end a bit, something I hadn't tried before, and I had to sink or swim a bit. They gave me a bit of support, and it was a bit scary, but then the second time I got a bit more used to it. Sure, I made a few mistakes along the way. So I think as the manager and the leader of the team, going on to the right-hand side of that slide, what your role becomes, I always think, is creating the environment, pushing back the parameters to let your team learn by doing, so that they've got room and opportunity to experiment. Because I think it's by that experimentation and the learning on the job, that's where a lot of our best learning comes from. If we can create those safe spaces, as you say, Roger, for people to actually learn, try, fail a bit, be in a safe environment so they can try more complex tasks and gradually have mastery of some of those things before they move on to the next level. But as I've probably said already, I'm a massive fan of learning by doing. So as leaders and managers of those of teams, we need to create that safe space. That's the key thing. Create the safe space for people to learn by doing. Key point. Okay. We're going to move on now to the third section, where I was going to, if we could have the next slide, please, where I was going to give a little bit more of the context around the organisational sort of structures, and if we could have the next slide after that, please. Sorry, as well. And I was going to take us a little bit through a sort of a very quick history lesson, probably the last 10, 15, 20 years in about 35 seconds or something like that. So I was just going to say that a little while ago, there was a model where you would have probably the legal services market was much more simple, a bit as the previous talk talked about. You had a client dealing with different firms. They might be on a panel providing services to the client. Next slide, please. And then what happened, and we could give those firms names. They might have been, you know, some of the big names, you know, such as Clifford Chance, Linklaters, Norton, Simmons and Simmons, Reed Smith, all of the firms you might recognise. Then we had the deregulation following the Clementi Review. We had these in the UK, in England and Wales. We had the ABSs, the alternative business structures permission come in, which basically meant that, as you know, that people who weren't lawyers could then own, invest and manage firms. So what did that lead to? And I'm thinking of you and your careers. What I'm trying to hopefully show here is I think there's very interesting future ahead, because there's much more choice. So if we could have the next slide, please. So what did that lead to? That led to much more plurality, much more variation in the types of employers that all of you will now be able to look at. So yes, we still have our clients who are working with their law firms. And I've just picked out DWF. There was just perhaps a different type of law firm, multinational firm, headquarters in Manchester, but listed, so has outside investment. Then you have some after the deregulation, you have some more different models of law firms. You have Keystone Law, which is more of an umbrella, central services, but it's lawyers who are generally very experienced lawyers. I think the average is over 20 years of qualification experience. So their model is a number of senior lawyers working with their practices, working with their clients, but under their, as part of their Keystone organisation. You have lawyers on demand. So again, what was that? An axiom. So you have more of these platforms where you have opportunities to be a little bit more connected in a project type way. And Chris, one thing I just wanted to say here was, it struck me when I was preparing this. I had the chance to speak to Janet Gamer, who was senior partner of Simmons and Simmons when I joined many years ago. Janet, a very eminent employment lawyer, and Janet always used to talk, about two things in terms of careers. And I did an interview with her recently. I don't know if we can share the link now in the chat, perhaps, where what Janet talked about is it seemed to her, as the market has developed, that people want increasingly a little bit more choice around the pace of their career, and also around the time and almost who controls the time. Because we could look back in time, and perhaps it was the employer who very much used to control the timing, you know, how many hours we worked. But again, with Lawyers on Demand, with Axiom, question, is there becoming perhaps a little bit more of a balance to retain people and attract people into careers where that thought of time, and actually, would I like to control the time of my career and what I'm committing to in the coming 12 months, etc., etc. So I think there's some interesting plurality, as I say, coming into the career paths available. And I've just put the big four there as well. So we've got EY and PwC. I think last time I checked, each of them had more than 3,500 lawyers working for them in 80 or 90 countries each. So again, thinking back, comparing, you know, those slides a couple of slides ago with the model now, I think it's really interesting that, you know, for all of you thinking about law, there are some fascinating opportunities in terms of the choices you can make of the types of organisations you'd like to work for.
Can I just jump in there, Nigel, if I may? So I've just been attempting to use my own tech skills and multitask, and I've just put the link to that interview you just mentioned.
Oh, thank you very much, Chris.
So hopefully our participants can see that. Yeah, a couple of the questions that have come in. We had a question early on about how does this skill set issue play out in the new types of law firm structure. Another question that somebody's asked is around size of firm, because I think a lot of what you've been saying, obviously you're both from firms that have a global reach and have that sort of, if you like, city type practice. How do the skills you talked about translate to smaller firms, niche firms, and firms doing other type of work? Because again, our students will be looking at all sorts of different training opportunities.
Sure. I mean, I have one point of view, and Roger, I'll happily hand over to yourself in a minute. I think what's interesting, Chris, is that organisations like that and those numbers I just said something before sounds very big. But I think it'd be interesting, Roger, to hear your perspective as well. My sense also, Chris, is that when you join in inverted commas a big firm, what you also find is you are actually part sometimes of a team that might be, your core team might be 6 or 8 people that you actually might work with. And yes, you collaborate, but I think sometimes the skill of the people who manage the big firms is actually making it feel small and personal as an experience of being part of that organisation. Roger, I don't know if you had any thoughts on that.
Well, I think the skills and habits and qualities we've talked about are directly applicable to all these different business entities and shapes. And I think that's because we're taking that information and translating from the clients. That's what the clients are saying. And the clients may be using one of those global firms, but they're more likely as not also using one of the new providers, the tech-based service providers. They might be using a bit of the big four. I mean, there's a whole range, and they'll be using one of the big city firms, and they'll be using firms from around the UK, Europe, and elsewhere. I mean, just one final thought. I mean, I read today for the first time that one of the litigation finance providers, Burford, which I think well known, but I think possibly the largest, has bought a minority stake, it's reported, in a UK litigation law firm. And I only mention that because there is another example of very rapid change that simply not have happened 5 years ago, 10 years ago, etc. And it goes to your ABS, alternative business structure. But for that business, I'm sure the skills matrix and your individual interpretation of it will be ever important, including more emphasis on tech, perhaps, in the widest sense. Back to you, Nigel.
Roger, you've made a really interesting point there. It's not just from a career point of view, I suppose, that I said there's choice, but you've made the point the client has choice. And the number of times now big firms are actually, as you say, Roger, the client saying, well, I'd like you to do part of that project, but we expect you to partner actually with one of these startups or with one of these more tech-enabled alternative business structures, one of the newer types of providers, to actually deliver that in an efficient way. You will also have seen, so on that point, I think it was Barclays a few weeks ago announced that they were having they were creating a little panel of the alternative, the more tech-enabled companies and firms to actually work with them on certain projects. You see sometimes, EY bought Riverview Law a year or two ago, Simmons and Simmons, again, hooking up with Wavelength. So there are all these different combinations. It's an interesting market at the moment.
Can I just jump in? We've got about 15 minutes to go. So just to hopefully we can cover as much ground as possible between now and then. And we still have our Slido question. I don't know if you want to get into that at this point. We've had about 40 questions, which is fantastic. And what I'm going to do is just tell you what the themes of some of those questions are. And again, you can consider in the time we've got left whether you want to pick those up. So COVID-19 has come in as a theme. People asking about how that's going to change the skills need or develop the skills need. Quite a few people talking about, understandably, how do I sell myself? How do I use LinkedIn? How do I use other strategies to exhibit and advertise the skills that I've got? And then the other part, which I think might give us a cue for another talk in the future, if you'd be willing to do so, is really drilling down on what some of these skills actually mean. So people asking, what does project management mean? Is it different from project management in other sectors? What does commercial awareness mean? What when we talk about a problem-solving mindset, can you give examples of that? So there won't be time to get into that, but I thought I'd just give you a flavour.
Well, Roger, should we go to one or two of those now? Because I'm conscious of giving people practical advice and some examples, perhaps, of breaking down what does it mean. I mean, I suppose so. Commercial awareness. What for me is it? I think it's partly about seeing the world through the eyes of the client. So, with my, I'm a qualified coach, and one of the things you do in your coach training is you often taught. You're taught really, and the thought is, be on the other person's agenda, be interested in their world, ask questions, be curious. So when you're in meetings with people, or perhaps they're coming onto campus to give a talk, and there's someone from a big commercial business organisation or part of the government, whoever you might be interested in working for, go up afterwards, be curious, ask questions, and listen. Roger's point, your point of listening, again, really critical. So Roger, I'll hand over to you, but just on that point of being interest, they always say, when you're at events or when you're meeting people, try and be interested. You don't need to be interesting all the time. So in other words, do a lot of listening. Roger.
Well, I think commercial awareness, I mean, it's a huge topic, but I think commercial awareness will differ at different stages of career. So when one goes to the senior end of a career and thinks a little bit about expertise, in an ideal world, one's talking at board level to the client, and one is able to understand the commercial rationale of which the legal issue is a mere consequence. I mean, it controls the framework, perhaps, but understanding what it is the client is really trying to achieve with a business transaction or in the context of a dispute or the like. When it comes to right at the beginning of a career, the first day in the office, if one thinks as a trainee, and it ties in exactly to what you have just said, what is the person giving me the instruction really wanting me to do? Do I understand have I asked the question? Do I really understand the scope of the project, when they want it done, etc.? Do they want an easy example, do they want a 20-page report, a 20-page essay, or do they want a 3-paragraph executive summary? Time and time again, the client will say that juniority will often equate to more words. And the sooner one can really grasp that question and what someone is looking for, to me, that's commercial awareness for a trainee, because they're saying to a partner or someone who's 2 years more senior, I understand this is what you're looking for. You're commercially aware to your client in that example. It's not only the actual client, it's the person who's asking you to do the work.
Yeah. And what COVID-19, how's it changed skills? I suppose we're all thrown into the way we're doing this talk. We're thrown into this remote way of operating. How does that change skills? I think, Roger, your point was interesting earlier. Roger made the point around clients are a bit surprised that people aren't picking up the phone more. So how much more proactive one should be, perhaps, in this virtual environment? It's interesting. I mean, it's interesting with a placement degree that that Queen Mary run, where actually the students in the third year go to for a year in a firm. And it was interesting that the students said that because they were able to be in the firms before the situation hit, actually they had some relationships. So before they could, before they were forced into a remote world. So I think that whole thing of how one is in a sort of a face-to-face world versus the more COVID situation that we're in a moment. I think proactive communication, picking up the phone more. I think as the senior person in the relationship, the manager of that relationship, again, checking in with people more often as well. So that mentoring, oversight? How often are we checking into to make sure everyone that I've delegated correctly, or that the person, as Roger said, is on the right path? Are they producing the 20 pages or the 3 paragraphs? So I think for me, there's something around clarity that you need to really work on there in this situation.
Yeah, Nigel, I agree. I mean, I think the words, the words on the slides, for example, that we've shown, are still probably the right words. I think it's their interpretation and their linkage with behaviour. And I think one thing we've got to think about behavioural change. So I'm going to pick another word, which I think is resilience at this time, because I read about it. Different people are feeling it. We know, but the need for resilience in very different working scenarios, albeit at the same time when many people are having to deliver projects and products, clients who are also under immense stress, sometimes for their businesses and livelihoods. So it's the interpretation of the words and the application. And I think it goes to the heart of the person who asked a very sensible question: what does commercial awareness actually mean, or what does that mean? I mean, absolutely, what does it mean? So I think with all these words, they need to be broken down and applied. It certainly means that the question of socialisation of law we mentioned earlier needs to go further up the agenda, and that means making sure your team members, your others at your level, peers, your fellow trainees, your fellow graduates, are okay. I mean, to me, one owes a sort of almost a semi-moral responsibility to do that, because one's all in it together. I think for me, adaptability and resilience and trying to get through the day, the week, and delivering quality and professionalism, that's one of the big challenges. But this is a huge topic, Chris.
Yeah, I think, Chris, as well, and Roger, it just struck me that thought of almost, as you said, Roger, almost the buddying up. I think little buddy pairs or mentoring pairs are a really good way, actually, Chris, of helping in that type of thing.
Huge amount to say here, and I think, as I say, we are going to consider very carefully another talk, because a lot of people asking, can we extend this talk, and also asking for further recommendations. So it's great to hear. I'll hand over to you the Slido question we've put on the chat. So if you're still looking at that Slido question, it's quite a good wrap-up question. Nigel and Roger, you've got about 10 or so minutes to go, so I'll hand over to you as to how you'd like to proceed from here. Okay,
Roger, was there anything you just wanted to add there before I go on?
Well, I was just going to raise one topic, Nigel, at this point, which is we talked about the different disciplines and the range of disciplines that are becoming relevant to law. Yeah. Whether it's project management, whether it's technology-based, whether it's law itself. And the Slido question that's out there with the participants, I'd like to sort of ask you and Chris really this question of, are there more opportunities for people coming into law from outside classic legal training? And there are changes to the qualification structure that are coming. We know that. So this is not only COVID and the effect on business, but also changing regulations around how one becomes a lawyer. Yeah. Chris and Nigel, maybe Chris, do you see that as opening the game up for a wider audience in terms of skills, disciplines, and indeed the question of social mobility?
Yeah, I mean, very quickly on this, obviously in the England and Wales jurisdiction, we are about to embark on a change in our regulation for the qualification of solicitors. So the new solicitors qualifying exam will change the setup so that it won't be necessary to have the traditional palette of formal legal qualifications. You'll simply need to pass that SQE, but all the firms we've spoken to have indicated they will still be seeking strong legal education one way or another. So I think it's not going to change us fundamentally in that way, but I do think it represents a liberalisation which is taking place and a broader approach to recruitment. And I think that firms are definitely recognising that graduates coming from other disciplines who've then converted to law have a lot to offer in terms of technology, science and other skills. Interestingly, psychology is coming out as the clear winner, as the area that people think will be important in the future. And I think that reflects this emphasis on personal skills and communication and understanding your client. But I think equally, something I've heard from a lot of the new legal technologists is I trained as a lawyer originally and so I think actually firms will still maintain a very, very strong core of those who train in the normal route and then go on to these more diverse areas. But certainly there'll be opportunities for people to come in from other perspectives and other disciplines.
Great, Chris. Just to add on that, of course, I'm sitting here as a classicist, so I can absolutely say that I've come into this from very left field. So for some reason, I didn't think to put classics up on there as one of the options there that one can go into them. But anyway, Chris, just on that point, actually, of entry points, should I move on to just perhaps the last section for the last few minutes? Just
yeah, I think if you could wrap up the slides, because I think the viewers would like to see how the slides conclude.
Of course, yeah. Could we go on to the next? Could we jump forward? Yeah, sorry, I know we need to flick between screens now. Thank you very much, team. Everyone will be pleased to know this is not in my control doing the slides today. So there we go. Yeah, can we move on again and one more after? Sorry, two more from there, please. Sorry. So one more and then, so where'd you start? Which is, I think, is Chris, is where you were thinking. So I just thought, sorry, can we go on one more just to the picture? Sorry, because I'm just conscious of time. So where'd you start? Yeah. So this was just from some research I did over the last few years, and having been in firms, been in the market and in my networks, talking to lots of people, what's happening to career paths? Much less linear and much more almost like a matrix, or as we can, or a lattice, as people sometimes describe it as. And I just wanted to highlight here again, just it almost sums up, I hope, a lot of things we've been talking about. Well, one point is, you'll change careers many times in your career, if I can put it like that, and you'll change identities, I think, many more times in your career. All of us will, looking forward. I've probably had 3 or 4 careers. You may have 6 or 7 in your careers. I think, you know, what we've said today, and with the changes in the jobs market, the way firms and clients are asking for support these days, we're all having to learn more regularly. The half-life of our skills is reducing, so we need to upskill ourselves more often. And this is just a career path that I've just put up there, not imaginary, because actually I've seen this as if you look through the jobs boards on the internet, you'll see many firms advertising these types of roles. You might start off as a degree apprenticeship at the bottom there, build up, as Chris says, your practice area knowledge. You might then go on, perhaps, you know, you might get interested perhaps by phase C in some of the data and some of the tech teams that are supporting the clients and yourselves doing the work. So you'll be liaising, that thing we said earlier about translating with your technology team and helping your clients work with that to get some tech solutions. You might then move perhaps into more a role that's perhaps about developing knowledge tools for clients. Perhaps you might be managing some people by then, managing one of those tech teams. Then you might go onwards and upwards, and it might be about more facilitating the client conversations in a client solution centre or one of those innovation hubs. And then perhaps you might go into some strategy group. And I suppose my point here is, don't think of this necessarily as being in one organisation as well. This might be in one organisation, the way that organisations, as I said earlier, and with Roger and Chris, they've been evolving. But you might change 3, 4, 5 times. You might go and start your own organisation and then supply services, or perhaps come back in with a law firm to work with their clients. There's such a different way. It's such more fluid, I think, an interesting jobs market looking forwards. And if we could just go forward a couple of slides, please. We'll jump to the next one because we've talked a lot about the skill sets, which and that was. So, but if we could jump forward once more. I think what I just wanted to end with, really, Chris, was this thought of, this is a bit of humour, or attempted humour, to think that the business card for yourself in the future, just think of it as being something where you actually create this and you write this quite often throughout your career. So your identity will actually change. It's interesting, when we did some projects around senior lawyers coming up to retirement, I think from some lawyers coming up to retirement now, they've only had almost one identity because the market was quite similar. I think for all of us going through careers now, for all of you going through careers now and looking forward to your careers, your identity will flex much more. And just to probably flick forward over the next couple of slides, literally just to end, Chris, to get through those, a change from perhaps starting with thinking that you did education at the beginning of your career to more thinking, well, actually, does that mean almost I do it much more often and I upskill myself much more often? You know, I think that's a model, Chris, for me, which is changing. As I say, we used to do education at the beginning, then go off to work for 35, 40 years with a bit of CPD, perhaps. But actually, I think now the upskilling becomes much more critical, much more perhaps more often and at a deeper level, as well as we go through our careers and create all those new identities for ourselves. So I think
Nigel, if I may, just on timing, that question on upskilling, for everyone to think about sort of progression as to when one starts a new role. I'm not saying on day one, but during that role, start to think about how do I develop my skills for the next role.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's right. I think that's right. Someone very wise once said to me, almost think two steps ahead, as you say, Roger. Very good point. Yeah.
Okay, I think I'm going to have to draw us to a close at that point, because we are on the witching hour of 5 o'clock, and I'm aware that it's a very pleasant afternoon out there, and I'm grateful to everybody for coming along today and sharing this space with us. The volume of questions has been fantastic, and thank you to all those who put questions in. We haven't been able to answer all of them. One that kept coming up was, where should I do my vacation scheme, and can you recommend a vacation scheme, please? Which I've ducked in a way, because I think I don't want to be promoting too many firms or opportunities, but in fact, there's been some good replies to that question on. I'm sure you would both recommend Reed Smith and Simmons at the very least, but there are many other great law firms are available. I just want to say thank you so much to Nigel and to Roger for today's talk. It's been absolutely great. Thank you also to Madeline, our events officer, for organising today, and to George, our technician, and to Sam Malhotra, who helped set up today's event, and all of the others, and Christine as well, who's been driving the slides for us so capably. It's been a really fascinating event. As I say, the volume of questions leads me to think that we need to do another one of these soon, and I've already made a few promises in kind to those who've been contributing that we will look at the earliest opportunity to do this again. So in the meantime, if we could all give a virtual round of applause to Roger and to Nigel, and thank you so much for your time. The recording of this event will go up on our Professional Law Institute website, which is at the top left hand side of your screen there, within hopefully a few days or a couple of weeks. So keep your eye out on our site, and you'll be able to see a recording with all the slides played out. We can't send you the slides individually, I'm afraid, but you'll see all of the images that were used on today's presentation. So thank you once again, and we will be having more talks in the future, so please keep an eye on this site for more information. And in the meantime, thank you to everyone again for coming along.
Thank you very much, Chris. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.